Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take the footnotes of history and blow them up into neon signs, giving you the shortcut to being genuinely well-informed.
And today we are cracking open one of the most transformative, yet I think widely misunderstood periods of American history. The Works Progress Administration, or the WPA.
That's right. Everyone knows those three initials, WPA. You see them, carved into bridge foundations, post office walls, maybe an old airport terminal.
Right, but if you stop and ask someone what the WPA actually did, the answers get pretty vague. It's usually, oh, they built roads, or didn't they paint some murals? There's this sense of it being just government make work.
And our mission today is to go so far beyond those initials. We're digging into the true, unprecedented scope of this New Deal agency.
We're talking about the sheer desperation that made it necessary, the intense political battles it sparked, and the surprising, enduring cultural legacy that still surrounds us. But maybe most importantly, how it restored a sense of dignity to millions of people.
Absolutely. Our sources for this deep dive provide just an incredibly intimate, detailed look at the trauma of the Great Depression and the scale of the government action that followed.
We're going to shortcut your understanding of how America went from the absolute brink of financial and social collapse to, well, building the very infrastructure and cultural foundation that let it survive the 30s and ultimately win a global war.
There is a lot to unpack, but we have to start at the bottom. The absolute bottom.
To really set the stage, we have to quantify this crisis, not just with numbers, but with a real sense of the human scale.
Okay, so what are we talking about when Franklin D. Roosevelt takes office in March of 1933?
The nation was, for all intents and purposes, paralyzed. The numbers are just staggering. You have as many as 15 million people jobless.
15 million.
And that's a full quarter of the nation's workers who are actively looking for a job and couldn't find one.
And when you project that across the population, you factor in the families, the wives, the children, the elderly parents who all depended on that one worker.
Right. The number just explodes.
In a nation of 130 million people, you're looking at maybe 60 million people with literally no financial support.
None. Facing cold, hunger, and the immediate threat of being thrown out of their homes.
You had silent factories, empty stores. Farmers were plowing under their fields because prices had just completely collapsed.
And the state and city relief funds, the traditional safety nets, they were all exhausted. There was nothing left. The net was gone.
So what's really crucial to understanding why something like the WPA was even necessary is recognizing that this descent into poverty, it wasn't a sudden shock.
No, not at all. It was an agonizingly slow, drawn-out process that just stripped people of their morale, their psychological well-being over years.
So what does that look like day to day?
Well, first, your savings are exhausted. And those savings were often lost anyway in the thousands of bank failures in the early 30s.
Right. So even if you'd done everything right, your money could just vanish.
Exactly. Then comes the borrowing. The quiet pleas to family members, maybe a friend. Then you start skipping rent payments. You can't pay the installment plan on the radio or the furniture.
And once that borrowing capacity runs out, the desperation starts to become physically visible.
It does. We read these accounts of people patching their clothing until the fabric literally couldn't hold new thread.
Imagine that constant nagging anxiety of not being able to replace a pair of shoes.
People's shoe soles wore entirely through. They would stuff them with whatever they could find, cotton, cardboard, old newspapers, just to keep their feet off the freezing sidewalks.
And the search for just the basic necessities was so degrading.
Oh, absolutely. We read these stories of people, grown men, chasing coal trucks down city streets, just hoping a few stray lumps would fall onto the pavement.
Just to get enough fuel to heat a single room for one night.
And that internal humiliation, that private shame of being jobless, it quickly turned into a devastating public shame. The evictions.
That had to be the ultimate trauma. Seeing your entire life, your furniture, your pots and pans, your kids' toys, just stacked on the city sidewalk for everyone to see.
It was a powerful, visible symbol of total societal failure. And the statistics just paint this horrifying picture. In Philadelphia, they were seeing 1,300 evictions a month in 1931.
A month.
A month. And in New York City, the estimate for that same year was 200,000. 100,000 evictions.
That level of dislocation, it leads directly to a massive increase in homelessness. We're talking about maybe 2 million people who became itinerant.
Right, nomads. Riding under or inside empty freight cars, wandering between these improvised camps they called hobo jungles.
And of course, building makeshift shantytowns in every major city.
These shantytowns, famously dubbed Hoovervilles, were the physical manifestation of the Depression's failure to provide basic shelter.
What were they made of?
Oh, anything and everything available. Sheets of corrugated metal, discarded tar paper, scraps of wood, even parts of abandoned cars. And they existed right in plain sight, often near city centers.
There's a really striking anecdote about that, right in the heart of Manhattan.
There is. A group of out-of-work tradesmen, skilled men, they set up their shanties near the obelisk behind the Metropolitan Museum of Art in Central Park.
In Central Park.
They were resourceful. They built structures out of bricks and egg crates designed to withstand the winter, and they called their little community Hoover Valley.
That's deeply ironic.
The local police mostly tolerated them. I mean, they knew there was nowhere else for these men to go. But eventually, the sheer lack of sanitation forced the health department to shut the whole colony down.
It's just such a visible, undeniable sign that the social fabric had torn even in the most protected, prosperous urban spaces.
And yet, throughout this entire period, President Hoover maintained this starkly contrasting and increasingly detached view of what was happening on the ground.
He held firm to his belief that, and this is a quote, "Nobody is actually starving in America."
He notoriously asserted that the hobos wandering the country were, quote, better fed than they have ever been. He even told this anecdotal story about one hobo in New York who managed to get 10 free meals in a single day.
That sounds just astonishing, especially when you put it next to the actual public health data.
Exactly. New York City health authorities recorded 20 confirmed deaths by starvation in 1931.
20.
And that number jumped to 95 in 1932. And these are just the confirmed cases. We have these devastating stories, like one of a registered nurse who had served in the World War, found starving in a maple grove on Long Island, eating scraps from restaurant garbage.
So Hoover's statements were just tragically, fatally contradicted by reality.
Right. And this stance, it's important to understand, it probably didn't come from simple callousness, though it certainly looked that way. It stemmed directly from his deep-seated philosophy.
Rugged individualism.
Exactly. Rooted in his incredible background as a self-made engineer and a Quaker, he believed that social responsibility had to be achieved through, voluntary local charity and the scientific application of enlightened business principles.
Not through the expansion of federal power.
Absolutely not. He saw the Depression not as a systemic failure needing a federal overhaul, but as a temporary kind of public relations problem that could be fixed with optimism, private sector confidence, and a return to the moral fiber of self-reliance.
And his optimism was relentless, even when it was completely misplaced. He kept predicting the end was just around the corner.
He did. As early as May 1930, he told the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, "I am convinced we have now passed the worst." A month later, he declared the Depression over to a delegation that was desperately seeking federal funding for public works.
So his whole approach was defined by this insistence on private sector recovery and balanced budgets.
Critically, his primary policy focus was maintaining a balanced federal budget. He saw that as the only sure path to restoring confidence and recovery. He resisted federal works because he saw the spending as destructive to the economy's moral and fiscal foundation.
And we see this play out perfectly when he appoints former New York City Police Commissioner Arthur Woods to chair the Emergency Committee for Employment in 1930.
A perfect example. Woods goes out, does the work, and he quickly discovers that local solutions are completely ineffective against a national crisis.
So who does Woods do?
He goes back to the president and urges him to submit a massive, comprehensive plan for federal public works.
Exactly the kind of federally funded jobs program that would become the core of the New Deal.
Precisely. And Hoover just dismisses the idea outright. He argues it's too costly, a violation of American tradition, and says the goal is to restore men to their regular jobs.
Which didn't exist anymore.
Which didn't exist. So Woods, seeing the writing on the wall, realizing the administration was structurally incapable of understanding the scale of the response needed, she resigned. The committee dissolved. And that was a critical early failure that cost the nation years of intervention.
So this political inaction, which was really fueled by economic dogma, it metastasized into massive public anger.
It did. And the one incident that finally, I think, cemented Hoover's reputation as being indifferent to human suffering took place in the summer of 1932, the Bonus Army incident.
This was a truly pivotal moment, a kind of historical earthquake. We're talking about around 20,000 World War I veterans.
Right, the Bonus Expeditionary Force, or BEF, they marched on Washington, D.C. They were seeking immediate payment of service bonuses that weren't due until 1945.
And they set up these massive, very visible Hoovervilles right near the Capitol. One huge encampment was right next to the Anacostia River.
But the political machinery failed them. The House passed the bill to pay them. It would have cost about $2 billion. But the Senate, obsessed with balancing the budget, killed it.
And even though the government offered the veterans travel money to go home, thousands of them vowed to stay, turning the march into this prolonged occupation.
And this is where Hoover made his fatal error. He panicked. He ordered the army to clear the shantytowns.
And the troops that were sent in were led by the Army Chief of Staff, Douglas MacArthur.
With a young Major George Patton and an aide named Dwight D. Eisenhower in the ranks, they executed the order with just shocking violence.
What did they do?
They used cavalry, swinging the flats of their sabers, trampling and scattering the veterans. Then the infantry put on gas masks and threw tear gas bombs
Against veterans?
against veterans, their wives, and their children, forcing them to stream out of their makeshift homes, clutching whatever they could carry. And the violence spread to the main camp across the river, Camp Marks.
They burned it down, didn't they?
They did. The troops systematically doused the tents and shacks with gasoline and torched them. The glow of the flames could be seen clearly from the White House.
And people died.
The grim casualties included 2 infants who died, apparently from the effects of the tear gas.
It's hard to imagine that level of force being deployed against American citizens, especially veterans. Was there no pushback within the military itself?
There was some internal disagreement. Eisenhower later said he opposed the move, feeling MacArthur was exceeding his orders. But MacArthur himself saw the veterans as revolutionaries, as a threat to the fabric of America.
And Hoover's response?
He tried immediate damage control. He claimed most of the men who remained were not real veterans, but communists and persons with criminal records.
An attempt to discredit them.
A complete failure. The visual of the U.S. Army deploying tanks and tear gas against its own former soldiers, especially given the clear violence and the deaths, it left this indelible, politically toxic, sour taste across the entire country. And all this just months before the presidential election.
This national tragedy just set the stage perfectly for Roosevelt.
Perfectly. In stark contrast to Hoover's grim defensiveness, FDR projected this enthusiastic, almost joyful style. Contemporaries called it a forceful serenity.
He laughed easily, he smiled quickly. He just communicated this immediate sense that no problem was too large to overcome, regardless of his own physical struggles with polio.
And Roosevelt very effectively captured the political mood by shifting the focus away from the failed leadership of bankers and industrialists. He used this really powerful military analogy to make his point.
The Napoleon analogy.
That's the one. He noted that the French emperor forgot his infantry. The present administration in Washington provides a close parallel.
So FDR promised to pay attention to the infantry of our economic army, the common worker, the farmer, the unemployed man.
Exactly. And his proposals, while they were still a bit vague on specifics, they embraced the country's profound yearning for change. When he gave his acceptance speech, he called for a New Deal.
And that phrase just caught fire.
Instantly. It captured the hope for federally funded public works jobs, for federal relief. As he powerfully put it, people wanted 2 things. Work, with all the moral and spiritual values that go with it, and with work, a reasonable measure of security.
But the crisis he inherited, during that agonizing 4-month lag between his election and the inauguration in March 33, it was immediate and crushing.
Oh, the entire American banking system was collapsing in real time. Over 5,500 banks had already failed, wiping out trillions in savings.
And the panic just accelerated after Michigan declared a bank holiday in February 1933.
Depositors were rushing to pull out their money. Gold and currency were flying out of banks at a horrifying rate, $122 million a day. The economy was hemorrhaging cash.
Which brings us to that defining inaugural moment. Saturday, March 4th, 1933, an ugly, cold day, mirroring the national outlook.
All 12 Federal Reserve banks were closed. Commercial banks in 43 states were either closed or limiting withdrawals. The system had frozen.
And FDR, drafting his speech at Hyde Park, must have felt the weight of history. I mean, the immediate practical necessity of giving Americans courage and just halting the panic.
He had initially wanted to keep the speech as brief and powerful as Lincoln's second inaugural, maybe 7 minutes.
But the crisis was too complex.
The depth of it just drove him to keep making additions until it was a nearly 15-minute address. He delivered it without a top hat or overcoat, with his hand on his family Bible, open to 1 Corinthians 13.
And now abideth faith, hope, charity, these three. But the greatest of these is charity.
It was a moment where confidence replaced despair. It signaled that the federal government was, at long last, ready to act.
Okay, so the moment of action required a system of delivery. And FDR turned immediately to a key figure he trusted from his time as governor of New York.
The architect of relief, Harry Hopkins, this is really where the machinery that would become the WPA truly begins.
Who was Hopkins?
He was a former social worker, an Iowan, who had directed New York's state relief agency, TARA. He was an absolute dynamo, deeply committed to federal relief, and he had this profound contempt for the idea that the jobless were malingerers or lazy.
His philosophy was rooted in human dignity.
Absolutely. He recognized that forcing people to reveal their desperate, embarrassing poverty just to qualify for aid actively abused their moral fiber. He believed a job was essential to maintaining that fiber, that self-respect.
And he was famously anti-bureaucracy. He was all about execution, not procedure.
Oh, famously so. When inspectors from the Bureau of the Budget came to look at his agency's organization, he told them, "I don't want anybody around here to waste any time drawing boxes." His efficiency was legendary.
How lean was his operation?
During the first year of the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, or FERA, he ran the Washington office with only 121 staff.
That's it.
That's it. His goal was to be extraordinarily efficient at spending public money. His own office was small and Spartan-faded walls, visible water pipes. It was a symbol of his dedication to the mission, not to any kind of personal comfort.
So the initial phase of New Deal relief involved a few major agencies starting up almost at the same time.
Right. First, you have the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, which was established incredibly swiftly in March 1933.
And this was the environmental and employment program limited to young, unmarried men.
Right. 18 to 25, all from families on relief. They lived in military-style camps, focused on reforestation, fighting erosion, improving national parks and forests.
And the structure of the CCC provided immediate, direct financial support to their struggling families back home.
That's a key point. $25 of the $30 monthly pay the young men earned was required to be sent home.
And critically, FDR showed he understood the political blunders of the last administration. He gave the remnants of the bonus army a much better welcome than Hoover did.
A far better welcome. He housed them at Fort Hunt, served them free meals, and offered them jobs in the CCC.
And how many took him up on that?
2,600 veterans accepted the jobs. They were deeply moved by this simple gesture of respect. Eleanor Roosevelt even visited the camp one muddy spring day, singing camp songs with them.
And that led to that famous quote.
One veteran's comment just encapsulated the profound contrast with Hoover's actions. Hoover sent the army, Roosevelt sent his wife. It signaled a totally different approach to government compassion.
So at the same time, you have the FERA, the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, being set up.
Right, and this was a crucial stopgap. It provided federal grants to the states for immediate emergency needs.
So this was both direct relief, like chits or vouchers for food and rent, and also money to support state-level work programs.
Exactly. And FERA literally dragged families back from the precipice of starvation. We know from records that in some places, families were trying to subsist on $2 a month.
$2, an impossible amount.
FERA was effective at providing that basic sustenance. But by the winter of 33-34, the administration was getting restless. The crisis demanded a massive, fast stimulus.
And one agency wasn't delivering that speed. The Public Works Administration, the PWA.
Correct. The PWA was run by the Secretary of the Interior, Harold Ikes, known to everyone as Honest Harold, or, less charitably, the Old Curmudgeon.
This is a really crucial distinction we need to make clear. Why did FDR need someone like Ikes, this meticulous, slow, old curmudgeon, when the crisis demanded Hopkins' speed? Didn't that just undermine the whole effort?
Not at all. It was actually a politically brilliant calculation. Ikes was the counterweight. He was ferociously meticulous.
So he vetted every single PWA project.
Every single one. And these were intended to be large, lasting, capital projects, dams, major bridges. His goal was to ensure zero corruption, zero waste.
Which was essential to protect the New Deal from congressional attack.
Precisely. But his process was excruciatingly slow. It was measured in months and years when people needed cash now.
And that's where Hopkins steps in.
Hopkins saw his chance. Roosevelt needed a massive, immediate injection of cash and employment to stave off winter despair, not just long-term investments. So over lunch with FDR, Hopkins pressed the point.
Then what did he promise?
He promised that if he was given the funding, he could create 4 million jobs immediately.
4 million?
Roosevelt, seeing the emergency, agreed. He diverted $400 million from the slow-moving PWA funds.
And the result was the Civil Works Administration, the CWA.
Created by executive order in November 1933, less than 2 weeks after Hopkins even presented the idea, this was the blitzkrieg of jobs, putting millions to work right before winter. It proved the government could act with incredible speed.
And the immediate impact was just phenomenal. It was tied directly to dignity.
It was. Workers were finally getting cash, not vouchers. There are these famous reports of shoes disappearing from store shelves so fast that factories had to reopen just to replace them.
Because men could finally afford new footwear after years of patching their old ones.
The psychological lift was enormous. As one county CWA director wrote, "Christmas during CWA was a cheerful episode. It immediately rejuvenated buying power and, maybe more importantly, national morale."
But the very speed and scale that made the CWA so effective also, well, it made it a massive target for criticism.
Oh, absolutely. When you create 4 million jobs in 2 weeks, not every single job is going to be perfectly planned out.
And this is where we get that enduring, mocking word, boondoggle.
Exactly. Critics seized on any evidence of waste or inefficiency to discredit the entire federal works concept. They mocked CWA and soon WPA workers as lazy, shiftless shovel-leaners.
And the initials WPA became a taunt. We piddle around. That narrative, regardless of how true it was, it really stuck.
One of the most famous examples of this supposed CWA waste came from the parks projects in New York City. Robert Moses, the city's new parks commissioner and a notorious taskmaster, he spied on the initial CWA crews.
And what did he find?
He found a ragtag, ill-equipped workforce. The most egregious anecdote was a crew that was ordered to shovel sand onto a reef off Staten Island to build it up.
Okay.
They'd shovel the sand and then watch the waves immediately wash it away before the next truck of sand even arrived.
So pointless labor.
Utterly pointless. He saw other crews huddled around fires made from the chopped-up handles of their own shovels.
So Moses, determined to enforce productivity and counter this boondoggle charge, he threatened to quit.
He did until he gained total administrative control. He hired construction ramrods for strict oversight and mandated these grueling 14-hour days for professionals designing the blueprints. Laborers who didn't work were fired on the spot.
So this chaotic early phase really highlights the crucial learning curve. If federal projects were going to work, they needed rigorous oversight and purposeful tasks.
A dash of Ike's curmudgeonly structure, ironically. The CWA also standardized the pay structure, adopting the PWA scale. Unskilled labor got between 40 and 50 cents an hour depending on the region, working 30 hours a week.
Which provided steady income, but opposition grew, not just from conservatives.
Right, often from those who felt left out. We have reports, for instance, of one mayor writing to Hopkins that 2,000 unemployed men who failed to get on the CWA rosters were threatening to riot and burn in the CWA offices.
And despite the overwhelmingly positive impact on morale and the economy, Roosevelt closed the CWA down.
He did, abruptly, in 1934. He had this optimistic but entirely incorrect belief that relief spending would be unnecessary by the following winter.
And the results of pulling that stimulus were
Immediate and negative. Sales and production lapsed right back into stagnation. It proved Hopkins and his aides were correct in their central belief. Only a massive ongoing works program could sustain the economy.
So consequently, the need for a sustained, long-term program, one that could exist for years, not months, led directly to the creation of the Works Progress Administration, the WPA, in May of 1935.
Authorized with a staggering initial appropriation of $4.8 billion, an enormous sum for the time, cementing it as the largest federal effort of its kind in American history.
But the new, massive agency had some costly missteps right out of the gate. One notorious example that just fueled conservative critics was the Florida Ship Canal.
Ah, yes. Promoted by local business interests in Jacksonville as a way to dig a deep water route across the state peninsula. Roosevelt, keen to start big, symbolic projects, approved it quickly. Construction started rapidly, employing nearly 7,000 men.
But trouble brewed fast,
Very fast. Farmers around Ocala quickly raised the alarm. They were terrified the canal would introduce seawater and contaminate the vast Florida aquifer.
which was the primary source of fresh drinking water and irrigation for the state.
This wasn't a minor concern, it was a potential environmental catastrophe in waiting.
And this local resistance then merged with congressional resistance.
Exactly. Driven by jurisdictional fights over the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1899, which affirmed Congress's power to approve such major works. Senator Arthur Vandenberg scoffed at the pipe dreaming on the phantom Florida Canal.
And Congress ultimately halted the project in 1936.
After over $5 million had been spent with no discernible return. Though Hopkins, ever the pragmatist, managed to salvage the newly built headquarters and turn it into a WPA vocational school.
An expensive lesson in political and environmental vetting.
And there was a more deadly, tragic setback. In September 1935, down in the Florida Keys.
Right. 700 World War veterans, still part of the relief population, were housed in these flimsy FARA work camps building a road.
And a deadly hurricane struck, killing over 400 of the veterans.
Ernest Hemingway, who lived in the Keys and saw the aftermath, publicly blasted the government for housing vulnerable people in poorly protected camps during hurricane season.
So these early errors, whether they were due to speed or political pressure or just bad luck, they provided ample ammunition for WPA critics on both sides of the aisle, even as the overall momentum of the New Deal was becoming undeniable.
Despite those early stumbles and that boondoggle accusation, the WPA went on to define the physical landscape of mid-century America.
It really did. The sheer volume of its work became, as one historian put it, so familiar as to go unnoticed. Its ubiquity paradoxically became its own worst enemy in terms of recognition.
People just assumed the rows and schools had always been there.
Exactly. But we need to put the scale into perspective because it's so often lost. The WPA employed a peak of 3.3 million people at one time.
And over its entire existence, what did they build?
WPA workers built an astonishing 650,000 miles of highway more than the existing road system at the time. They constructed 125,000 public building schools, post offices, hospitals. They built or repaired over 75,000 bridges.
This wasn't just paving sidewalks, this was building the backbone of modern America.
And we're talking about massive, iconic achievements that are still central to American life. Think about the Cow Palace Exhibition Hall in San Francisco.
Hosted the Republican National Convention in '56.
Or the fact that both LaGuardia Airport in New York City and National Airport, now Reagan, in Washington, D.C., were WPA projects.
The Outer Drive Bridge on Chicago's Lakeshore Drive. The famous Riverwalk in San Antonio.
All WPA. Let's focus on one specific, remarkable example to really understand the commitment to quality and skill. The Timberline Lodge in Oregon.
A massive, elegant, rustic lodge sitting 8,540 feet up Mount Hood, a truly challenging location.
An incredible undertaking. WPA crews first had to refurbish an old CCC camp way down the mountain just to house the thousands of workers.
And the lodge itself was designed to withstand the elements.
Designed by architects to shed an average of 250 inches of winter snow. And it was constructed almost entirely using native materials, local stone, cedar, Douglas fir, so it blended perfectly into the terrain. The construction effort was almost medieval in its scale, but highly modern in its design.
And the workers were sustained by this massive effort. There's the story of Henry Moore, a laborer on the project.
Right, one of 7,000 WPA workers in the Portland area doing incredibly hard physical labor. To sustain this work, the chef made sure they ate 3 huge square meals a day.
What was on the menu?
Massive plates of hot cakes, ham, beef, 2 vegetables, dessert, all designed to provide the thousands of calories you need for heavy labor at that altitude. It was about enabling hard, meaningful work through proper care.
Beyond permanent construction, the WPA also proved to be this ultimate rapid response force for disaster relief.
Oh, absolutely. When major spring floods hit in 1936, 100,000 WPA workers were immediately mobilized for cleanup efforts in New England and the Ohio River Valley.
And they were crucial in reinforcing levees and battling rising waters during the big Mississippi River floods.
Working around the clock in freezing mud and rain, they leveraged that existing organized workforce to respond instantly to national emergencies.
There are also these fascinating stories of unique, ongoing challenges that were solved by applying WPA labor at scale. like the new Straitsville mine fire in Ohio.
This was not a quick fix. This was a 50-year-old underground coal fire, consuming a vast fortune in black diamonds. The fire, fed by air through tunnels and surface fissures, had defied every previous attempt to extinguish it.
So starting in October 1936, WPA coal miners were employed in the sustained, highly specialized effort to fight this seemingly unstoppable fire.
They engineered massive clay firewalls, they bulldozed dirt to cut off the air supply, they sealed off tunnels, essentially suffocating this immense blaze. It was a massive multi-year undertaking that the WPA finally declared extinguished on January 1st, 1940.
It just highlights the WPA's capacity to handle these industrial-scale specialized problems that no private or local entity could afford to tackle.
And finally, we have to look at how the WPA enabled pure research by providing the necessary manpower. Archaeology and the WPA were a perfect match.
Because historical digs require immense amounts of manual labor that was just prohibitively expensive otherwise.
Exactly. The Smithsonian Institution applied for grants under FARA, and later the WPA, to conduct major excavations.
And these projects didn't just provide jobs, they fundamentally expanded our knowledge of American history.
They reviewed sites that were previously untouched. The WPA provided the labor for extensive excavations of the ancient Hopewell Indian village in Louisiana and mound sites along the Green River in Kentucky.
And the archaeologists themselves said these projects were only possible because of the WPA workforce.
They did. They noted that it allowed them to excavate such a large portion of the sites that their whole history was revealed. It moved archaeology from a niche pursuit to a massive national undertaking.
The WPA wasn't just shovels and concrete, despite what the critics claimed. It was an employment agency for every skill level, especially for white-collar workers and professionals.
And the woman who oversaw much of this was Ellen S. Woodward, the head of the Division of Women's and Professional Projects.
Teachers were among the very first white-collar workers hired under FARA and later the WPA.
Right, eventually putting tens of thousands to work. They conducted literacy classes, vocational education, general adult aid for unemployed adults who were seeking new skills.
They also helped reopen nursery schools that had been forced to close due to lack of local funding, which offered childcare for working mothers.
It was a recognition that intellectual and educational infrastructure was just as critical as physical roads.
And this leads us to the hugely important and humanitarian hot lunch program.
Started under FARA and championed vigorously by Eleanor Roosevelt, it expanded nationwide. By 1936, the program was serving thousands of school children.
And often using menus written by WPA dietitians, specifically designed to fill the severe nutritional gaps in impoverished children.
And the results were immediate and measurable. It proved the program's worth beyond simple relief. School attendance shot up by 37% in some Tennessee counties where it was implemented.
Wow.
In Augusta, Georgia, school nurses recorded that previously malnourished children gained an average of 5 pounds. It was improving their health and their cognitive capacity.
One official in Minnesota hailed it as the best truant officer the schools have ever seen.
Because children were finally motivated to come to school for that guaranteed meal.
But even a program feeding hungry children drew the ire of certain groups.
It did. Rufus S. Lusk of the Washington Taxpayers Protective Association famously objected, asking, if free school lunches should be furnished, why not clothes and shoes?
A criticism that was completely blind to the fact that the WPA was already addressing clothing needs.
Through its massive sewing operations, that's a key point. The WPA hired thousands of unemployed textile workers and seamstresses to cut, stitch, stuff, and sew clothes, blankets, and mattresses for relief families.
And Hopkins had to actively defend this program against commercial objections from manufacturers.
They claimed the WPA was undercutting the private market for clothing. And Hopkins's defense was classic.
What'd he say?
He argued, quite rightly, that the families receiving the finished goods couldn't afford to buy them anyway, so no market was being lost. On the contrary, once the sewing room workers were paid a living wage, they would start buying clothes and other goods, stimulating private industry.
It's that classic example of treating people not as liabilities, but as economic resources.
And moving from textiles to literacy, one of the most unique and celebrated professional projects was the story of the pack horse librarians in eastern Kentucky.
This was a job posting that women, like one named Grace, found was not just for men.
It's an incredible image of service. These 107 librarians, predominantly women, delivered books, magazines, recipes, even mail-order catalogs to remote mountain schools and families that were completely isolated.
They often rode a circuit, hitting every house and school at least once every 2 weeks, often in dangerous weather.
And think about the scale of access they provided. Even early on, in 1936, when it was limited to only 10 counties, they delivered 33,000 items to 57,000 families.
The experience was transformative for these communities.
It was. As Grace and her horse, Bill, would approach a one-room schoolhouse, the children would rush out shouting, "Book lady's coming, book lady's coming."
This wasn't make work. This was providing essential education and cultural connection to isolated communities.
Linking directly back to that idea of restoring dignity through meaningful service.
And this professionalism extended right into the arts with Federal Project Number 1, or Federal One.
Which covered art, music, theater, and writers. It employed thousands of professionals, many of whom were renowned but completely destitute, ensuring that America's cultural talent wasn't lost to the Depression.
The art project alone employed 5,000 artists. They created murals in post offices, hospitals, high schools, all across the country, often depicting local history or industry.
A famous example is the Harlem Hospital murals. Charles Alston led the first group of African-American artists to win a major WPA commission. They depicted African-American progress from slavery to the professions.
And it was controversial. The superintendent initially rejected the sketches for having too much Negro subject matter.
But beyond the murals, the art project undertook this immense archival effort, the Index of American Design.
Oh, if that.
It was a vast project to create an exact pictorial record of disappearing American artifacts, costumes, quilts, folk art, sailing ship figureheads, everything.
So it was an enduring collection.
22,000 images, all intended to ensure future artists and designers had historical resources to draw upon, and an invaluable contribution to cultural history.
The Music Project, headed by Nikolai Sokolov, aimed to provide real music to people who were financially excluded from professional performances.
The goal was massive musical education and entertainment across the country. Ensembles, orchestras, bands played everywhere, in parks, schools, civic centers, even railway stations. They honored all requests, proving that cultural sustenance was considered just as vital as physical sustenance.
And finally, the Writers' Project was tasked primarily with producing the American Guide series.
Comprehensive local guides to all 48 states. And the objective was to produce books that were lively and engaging, not dry government manuals that would gather dust.
This project even generated its own fascinating drama.
It did. Henry Alsberg, the director, wanted the Washington, D.C. guide to be the debut volume to impress Congress. But the Western novelist Vardis Fisher, who was in charge of the Idaho guide, was racing to finish first.
A rugged individualist author.
Absolutely. He'd done most of the heavy lifting himself, and he fought back against Alsberg's attempts to delay his publication. Fisher won, and his success effectively raised guide writing to the plane of permanent literature.
So while the infrastructure achievements were, for the most part, lauded, the cultural projects, especially the Federal Theater Project, became an immediate lightning rod for political criticism.
Oh, absolutely. The criticism focused on perceived radicalism and social change.
The Federal Theater Project, or FTP, was headed by Hallie Flanagan, who deeply believed the theater was a force for social change and public education.
It employed thousands of actors, designers, and playwrights, and the tension between art and politics was, almost inevitable, given the nature of the Depression and the New Deal.
One of the most famous and spectacular productions was Orson Welles' Voodoo Macbeth in Harlem in 1936.
A huge production, 137 actors and staff, set in 19th century Haiti. 10,000 people milled outside the Lafayette Theater on opening night. It drew every major critic in the city.
And the controversy was intense.
Fueled by conservative outrage over its experimental nature, and even some rumors in Harlem that the play was a white man's trick to embarrass the black community.
Another major flashpoint involved the opera, The Cradle Will Rock, by Mark Blickstein.
A very politically charged piece about the labor management divide in a fictional steel town. The WPA, under intense political pressure, feared the backlash from this pro-union opera and shut the production down in 1937 on its scheduled opening night.
But that wasn't the end of it.
No, the defiance was magnificent. The cast and crew, legally barred from performing on the stage because of union rules, they relocated. They marched 10 blocks down the street.
And they performed the entire show from the audience seats.
With Blitzstein narrating and providing accompaniment on a piano, this act of theatrical rebellion just solidified the project's reputation for innovative art and for dangerous radicalism.
And that political backlash, it wasn't organic, it was highly organized.
Right. The anti-Roosevelt American Liberty League, which was funded by extremely wealthy industrialists like the DuPonts and GM executives, formed in 1934 specifically to fight what they called government encroachments.
They perceived the New Deal as a slide towards socialism, and they wanted to dismantle these programs piece by piece.
And this pushback culminated in the formation of the DIES Committee, the precursor to the infamous House Un-American Activities Committee, or HUAC.
Chaired by Congressman Martin Dies.
Dies had initially promised to focus on American Nazis, but he quickly shifted his entire focus to targeting communists, particularly within the WPA arts projects.
And the hearings rapidly devolved into what was described as a riot of false accusations.
Driven by a political agenda, not actual evidence, the committee relied heavily on witnesses who were often prejudiced, disgruntled, or dismissed employees, like one Hazel Huffman who was caught opening Hallie Flanagan's mail.
And they hurled charges of communist propaganda and un-American atmosphere at the arts projects.
And the accusations were often just absurd, reflecting the paranoia of the era. For instance, the Massachusetts Writer's Guide was attacked for devoting 31 lines to the controversial Sacco and Vanzetti case, but only 14 lines to the Boston Tea Party.
And to the committee, that disparity was proof of Marxist infiltration.
The committee also shamelessly capitalized on raw racial prejudice. We have testimony from a blonde Austrian-born actress who complained under oath that blacks and whites on the theater project fraternized like communists in pursuit of social equality and race mixing.
It shows how political opponents were weaponizing cultural and social change against the WPA, using fear to cut funding.
And Hallie Flanagan, the director of the FTP, she repeatedly wrote to Dies, asking to testify to defend her project. She said she had been fighting un-American inactivity, meaning unemployment, for 4 years.
Arguing that putting people to work was the most patriotic act possible.
Her requests were ignored until she was eventually called, only to be dismissed abruptly. One committee member joked that she didn't look like a communist, adding, "You look like a Republican." The attacks worked. Congress shut down the Federal Theater Project in 1939.
And despite the overwhelming public popularity of the WPA's projects, Congress succeeded in asserting these stiff new controls aimed at curbing what they called careerism and cutting costs.
This resulted in 2 major changes that directly and painfully affected the workers who relied on that WPA paycheck.
First, the 18-month rule was enacted.
This policy stipulated that workers could be on the WPA rolls for no more than 18 consecutive months. Then they had to take a mandatory month off and recertify for relief before they could come back.
And that affected an estimated 600,000 workers by August 1939. It caused immense hardship.
Second, the new wage scale implemented in 1939 hit skilled workers in urban areas particularly hard.
How so?
Before this, they had earned the prevailing union wage but worked limited hours to keep costs low. Under the new scale, their total monthly pay was essentially frozen or slightly reduced, but their required hours often more than doubled.
So it pushed the WPA away from its initial commitment to fair union-level labor practices.
Right. In New York, carpenters who had previously earned about $85 for 48 hours of work were now required to work 120 hours, a massive increase for slightly less pay.
And this sparked widespread strikes.
It did. Work stoppages shut down construction in cities like Minneapolis for 2 full weeks. But ultimately, the strikes dissolved. Workers realized that the steady WPA paycheck, even under those crushing new hours, was still the only reliable income they had. They just couldn't risk losing their place on the rolls.
So the economic recovery achieved by the WPA was never really self-sustaining.
No, and that was proven definitively by the Roosevelt recession of 1937-38. When FDR cut spending in response to political pressure for a balanced budget, the economy immediately plunged backward.
Industrial output fell 40%, corporate profits fell 80%, and unemployment jumped right back up to 19%.
It was a painful setback that definitively proved Harry Hopkins's central argument. Ongoing, federally funded works were absolutely necessary to stabilize the economy until private industry could truly recover.
But the global landscape was shifting dramatically, and that offered the economic solution that the New Deal couldn't fully achieve on its own.
As Hitler annexed territory in Europe, FDR's focus shifted inexorably to national defense. This culminated in his famous call for the United States to produce a standing air fleet of 50,000 planes a year.
And the WPA was perfectly positioned to transition into a massive, organized defense program.
It already had the logistical framework and the skilled labor force. It modernized army and air bases and rapidly ramped up military supplies.
So WPA workers were crucial in building new magazines and roads at major military manufacturing sites, like the Picatinny Arsenal in New Jersey.
An ammunition factory that had been around since the Revolutionary War.
The story of Jimmy Bonanno, a carpenter, it really illustrates this transition from desperation to national recovery perfectly.
It does. Bonanno started in 1939 doing small WPA jobs, clearing lots, digging ditches, building shelves for the borough jail. He quickly regained his carpentry skills,
And then he joined the massive 24-hour crew building LaGuardia Airport.
which had a WPA share of $27 million. He was working on huge hangars and observation decks.
So his employment progression really tracks the nation's recovery in miniature.
It does. He eventually left the WPA entirely when a union offered him a private sector job building defense housing in Connecticut. He was one of 855,000 workers who left the WPA between July 1940 and March 1941.
The agency was successfully feeding its organized, trained labor force back into the burgeoning, war-driven private economy.
Even the WPA cultural division shifted to war work. Mural painters designed camouflage patterns for tanks and ships. Graphic artists produced civil defense posters.
And the Writers' Program produced recreational guides for military camps and cautionary pamphlets for new recruits. Everything was repurposed for the war effort.
And the scale of job creation in the private defense sector finally overwhelmed the WPA's reason to exist. By 1943, unemployment reached 1.9%.
A direct, stark contrast to the 25% of a decade earlier. The Movervilles and the breadlines, thanks to the WPA and then the war, they were now just a memory.
Which meant the WPA achieved the ultimate measure of success for an emergency relief program. It made itself obsolete.
And on July 1st, 1943, amid the global fight against the Axis powers, the Works Progress Administration ended.
Virtually unnoticed, it truly died because it no longer had reason to exist. #outro.
In reviewing the entirety of the WPA's history, the sheer scale of the legacy is just. It's massive and indisputable.
It employed 8 million Americans. It supported 30 million dependents. It provided them with the necessary work and the essential security they so desperately needed during the nation's darkest hour.
And its physical legacy, it truly defines modern America. The roads, schools, airports, stadiums, courthouses, water lines, even public pools and animal shelters built by the WPA.
They became so familiar as to go unnoticed. They're the indispensable foundation upon which the post-war generation was raised.
You're rarely more than a few miles from a WPA project, even today.
But I think the philosophical takeaway is what really shines through, moving beyond the simple statistics and the concrete. The WPA was founded on the New Deal's fundamental wisdom of treating people as a resource and not as a commodity.
Right. Roosevelt and Hopkins believed that if people were simply given a job, a useful job, and their dignity was restored, they would not only contribute but excel, regardless of who signed the paycheck.
And they were demonstrably correct. The WPA workers created infrastructure that still stands strong today, art that is still admired, research that is still relied upon.
They clothed the threadbare, fed the hungry, taught the illiterate. They restored renewed hope and courage to a broken generation by investing in their utility.
And this brings us to the final provocative question for you, the learner, to consider. Is this model of massive, focused government intervention, this mobilization of a vast labor force, focused on restoring dignity by providing purposeful, useful work, is that just a historic artifact, almost lost to living memory?
Or does it represent a potential model for future government initiatives when we face large-scale national needs, whether those challenges are economic collapse, infrastructural decay, or even climate change?